morning. Morning. We start our seminar. It is my pleasure to invite you today um, to talk about strengthening regional economies, the role of universities in regional development. We have special guests from the Indiana University, and the speech will be by Szarleta, Professor Ellen Szarleta, Director of Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. Welcome you very warmly here. And we have 45, 50 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll have a discussion. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Appreciate it. Good morning or afternoon, everybody, right? Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you specifically to Kasha. We are looking very forward to building our relationship. I have with me a colleague. Can you hear me, first of all? Can you hear me? Yeah. Is that any better? Yeah. Okay. So I was saying thank you to Kasha, who has been a gracious host to us, and Frank, my colleague from Indiana University, is here to explore possible relationships between our university, Indiana University, and specifically the IU Northwest campus. So my name is Ellen. I'm from Indiana University. I actually work on the Northwest campus, which is in Gary, Indiana. So if you're familiar with the geography of this part of the Midwest, that's actually close to Chicago. So we sit essentially 10, 15 minutes outside of Chicago on a good day when you don't have a whole lot of traffic, right? So it is my pleasure to be here. And I wanted to also take a moment to thank my colleagues back at IU for supporting this work that I'm going to be talking about today. We have embarked on a really important transition at our university. We are very mindful and intentional about collaborating with our communities in performing applied research. And so I wanted to share with you today a little bit about the work that we are doing specifically on strengthening our regional economies in Indiana. Thank you. And sit down so I can move through this for you. So a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today to give you some perspective. The overview that I'm going to give you first is of Northwest Indiana and specifically IU Northwest. It's really important to understand the context within which we work before you can understand how we are applying theory to solve problems in our communities. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. If you're not familiar with Northwest Indiana, you're going to learn a little bit about us. And then I'm going to talk about an application that we have to urban redevelopment partnerships. Okay. So Northwest Indiana's regional economy. In Northwest Indiana, we have been for a very long time until very recently a manufacturing industrial-based economy. We sit on Lake Michigan. That is that gray area that you see. That would be and then all along that shoreline where we have Indiana between Illinois and the state of Michigan, we have a number of different industries that have taken advantage of the geographic assets that we have there, including now an international port, multiple steel industries, and then steel-related industries. So the city of Gary. So what you're looking at across the lake from us is Chicago. So that vision on the right-hand side there is of the city of Chicago on a good day when we don't have a whole heck of a lot of pollution. But we have amazing physical assets, including that shoreline. We have national dunes and parks, but we also have, in contrast, a very strong industrial history, which has left a legacy of different issues that are not necessarily positive issues for us in the Northwest Indiana region. Okay. When I talk about Northwest Indiana, I'm going to talk specifically about three different what we call counties in our state. We, meaning IU, Northwest specifically, live in Lake County. Okay, in the city of Gary, Indiana. But when we think about how we are organized economically and socially, we refer to ourselves as the region. So that includes typically 3 counties, sometimes as many as 7 counties, but those counties, if you see, share that shoreline of Lake Michigan, and because of that, they're integrated economically and also socially. So it's important to recognize that we're talking about many different small communities organized inside of 3 different counties with different jurisdictions, governance patterns, and so it can become quite complex economically and socially to address all of the needs that we have in that particular region. It also means that for our campuses, such as IU Northwest, we actually serve a very large metropolitan area, almost 800,000 people, 500,000 of those individuals living just in Lake County alone. Right. And we are a regional campus that has approximately 3,000 students. But with all of the regional campuses of IU, we serve 20,000 students. So we have the power of 5 campuses behind us, but very directly serving this particular region. Okay. So, just to give you a little bit of context, I'm going to start at the highest level, looking at those 3 counties so you can see what's happened over the last 20 or so years with respect to our population. Why is this important? Because when we think about what we need to do in the region to develop economically, we want to be able to recognize not only the similarities that we have across those counties, but also the differences. And so, if the top green line is that Middle County's population growth. So you can see that there has been tremendous growth in that particular county, while in Lake County, it's been fairly stagnant. So we have to account for both trends when we're looking at our economic development. The Porter County, or the top green line, is the county that is more suburban and rural in nature. So people have moved there over the course of the last 20 years as a result of some of the issues that we're facing in what we call our urban core, okay? That core metropolitan area. So Lake County itself, which is where the work took place, has 20 government units. There are 92 counties in the state of Indiana. Did I get that right, Frank? 92 counties in the state of Indiana. We're looking at one of them. It's the second largest county. But if you can imagine, inside of that county, there are 20 different local government units. So we have um, balkanization issue, eh, uh, even though we are united by county government and by state government, because these competitive local government units see things from their perspective, we have not always been able to engage them in economic cooperation in a way that benefits not only Lake County, but the entire region of Northwest Indiana. We've made a lot of progress in the last couple years, but we have not, we still have a lot of work to do. So the historical context is that the challenges that we face with respect to governance, the lack of capacity that we have with respect to our ability to cohesively analyze a problem, have limited also our ability to gather data and the analysis that is beneficial. So, um, this is an important point to recognize. We're not dealing with just one city. We're dealing with multiple cities, county, and then, of course, other governments. Okay. So let's take a little deeper dive into Lake County. There are some very positive things that have happened as well. All right. So we have made investments in education. Universities have played a role in moving the population forward with respect to educational accomplishments and attainment. Bachelor's degrees, that would be our, I'm not sure what you call the equivalent of it in Poland, but is it the same thing? Yeah. Okay, so apologies for my ignorance on that issue. But a larger percentage of our population now hold bachelor's degrees in 2023, associate degrees, or at least have some college. So prior to that time, we were looking at percentages below 20%. Now, in 2 of those cases, we're looking at percentages that are above 20%. 34% of our individuals have high school educations, and we still have some individuals that don't have not graduated from high school or have the equivalent of a high school degree. Okay. So some progress there on educational trends. Now we're going to take a little deeper dive into one particular community. And this is the city of Gary, Indiana, which was founded by U.S. Steel Corporation in 1908. Okay, so 50 plus square miles, 58,000 parcels or individual land units, a population that was once almost 200,000 individuals, declined now today to about 68,000 people. That population decline is significant in and of itself. There was also a demographic change where we had a diverse population composed of immigrants, Polish immigrants, Italian immigrants, many immigrants who worked in the steel industry, to now a predominantly African American community. Over 85% of the individuals there. That says 80. We now have more recent numbers. 85% are African American. So we have population decline, change in the composition of the population, and much of that was due to the decline in the steel industry. Um, so jobs that were in the steel industry were on 60 or so thousand jobs. Now we're at 16,000 jobs. So employment opportunities changed, politics changed, and economic decline occurred and decay set in. That led to then poverty, with 30% of our households being below the poverty level, median income levels of 34,000, and approximately 25%, maybe slightly more now, of the units being vacant housing. So you can imagine the economic challenge that we have as we are moving forward. And this is one of the municipalities in Lake County, which is part of the larger region. Okay. Okay. This is I thought you might find this picture interesting. This was a church that was functioning back in the early 1900s and into the middle 1900s, and is now abandoned. So some incredibly beautiful architecture. This is an asset that we have in our community, but is now abandoned, and you can imagine what the costs of addressing an issue like that would be. And that's only one of the structures that's inside of the city of Gary. And so we clearly learned very early on in this process that there was going to be a need for collaboration, not just a need between collaboration among local municipal units, because Gary sits at the heart of the county, and but also collaboration between the university and the community itself. Because what happens in Gary, we say, also affects the entire county and the region, right? So our legacy as a university is to serve those individuals, our students, the community members, um, who are in our community. And so a little bit of more history here for you. Um, our building, the Gary Center building, opened in 1959. That became part of the current campus's site. So we're still relatively young, right? We started out in the early 1800s offering adult education programs, meaning programs that were not academic credit bearing programs, right? But were programs that were used for professional development purposes when individuals were transitioning in employment. And so with that history of working with our school systems, we moved into eventually becoming a unit of Indiana University and being established in the city of Gary, serving that particular city. So we now have, as I said, approximately 3,000 students. We have master's degrees that we offer. Just a little bit more background. Public policy is the area that I work in, and so we have a master's in public administration. But we have other master's programs as well. Healthcare is a very strong component of our campus activities, as well as the School of Business. But we also have liberal arts. And back in 1972, we added a branch of the IU Medical School. So we actually have medical school students on our campus studying medicine and getting a degree from Indiana University. Okay, so building, connecting those issues that I just talked to you about with the assets that the university has, our history of being present in that community and serving the community is really the theme of what I'm going to be talking about today, how that has evolved over time and what it has meant for us and for the community as well. So to withstand the stresses that we have undergone, the changing conditions in manufacturing, the changing conditions in population growth, the poverty that has emerged, we need to build a resilient infrastructure. And that infrastructure has to provide not only essential services, but has to provide that opportunity for education. And you can see by the previous slides that we have contributed to that and moved the needle on preparing our population to become better citizens, but also to become better prepared for the workforce as well. So that what we call resilient knowledge infrastructure is the knowledge that gets shared through formal means, which is in our classes, teaching our students, but also knowledge that gets created when we work with the community. And so that knowledge becomes embedded then in the students as they move into our community. Most of our students do not leave the region. We are actually educating leaders who are going to stay there and who are going to be making the policies, who are going to be impacting everyone who is in that larger community. So when we think about resilience, what we want to think about is, what does that look like? How do we participate in the planning, designing, delivery of tools that communities can use to build their resilience? And we do it in what we say using co-created impact. We intentionally engage in using the knowledge and the expertise of the community, combining that with what we have at the university, and then co-creating, not the university creating, but co-creating that impact in the community. So creating that common understanding of what the tools are that can best address the problems that the communities are facing, whether it's a public sector, nonprofit sector, private organizations, we serve all those sectors, is really the best way for us to prevent and also mitigate any future shocks, right? So sometimes we're going to be able to prevent those shocks when we have informed decision making, evidence based decision making, but other times we're just going to be able to respond to them in a way that is more productive than perhaps we have done in the past, because we're going to have that shared knowledge to move us forward. So you might ask, why did we? This is a change for universities. In the past, our pattern has been more of consultation, right? So, and I'll give you an example, a very specific example in Gary, but um, community calls us in and says, "Hey, we have this problem. Can you do a data analysis? Can you can you give us some policy alternatives?" Right? And so we go back to our offices, we do the work, we do the data analysis, and then we hand it over to them and we say, "Here you go." Right? We found that that was not very effective for fostering long-term change in our specific context. So we re-examined the model and we said, what if we were to bring the whoever it is we're working with, private, nonprofit, or public sector, to the table and have them co-define the problem? We'll sit down and talk about this together and then decide how we move forward together, even in terms of research techniques. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Um, Engage our students in the work that's taking place, whether it's research based, internship based, and then at the same time contribute to the public good. So the benefit for us, because we had to look at this logically, right? Is this something that's also within our mission, but will bring us benefit, is to improve our research outcomes, to enhance the teaching and learning that takes place in the community, and then also more generally to contribute to the public good. So our model of university teaching, research, and service has begun to change. We're calling that community engagement. That's a center that I actually run on our campus. And so our role and responsibility is to look for the opportunities for the assets of the university to connect to the assets of the community to address real world problems in the present day. Okay. Um, Okay, so talk about real world problems. I'm going to show you some real world problems. Kasha has been so kind and gracious to visit us, and so she can tell you more about this. It's really hard to capture this in a picture, right? But you get a sense of what's happened here. So if you can imagine back, 50, 60, 70 years ago, you had small homes built by a steel company, workers closely located to where they work, and secure jobs, income, stability, an education system that was the premier education system in the United States. In the United States, right? And as the transition occurred, we're now left with what you see here. Okay. The abandoned properties, large and small, homes that have been challenges not only from an economic perspective, but from a social perspective as well. Crime, obviously, you know that when you have conditions like this, you can attract undesirable activities, right? It's a good place to hide if you want to do things that you're not supposed to be doing. Okay, so it becomes not just a social issue, but it becomes an economic issue. Everybody can see this. Government officials can see it. Private sector can see it. Nonprofit sector can see it. Right? Um, we needed to connect our asset, which is our ability to do research, to action in the community through collaboration. The example that I gave you before of a unit of government coming to us and saying, okay, we recognize there is a problem. Can you help us better understand this problem or solve this problem? Started out really, and this is, I'm going to tell you, progression, how we move. We didn't just say, okay, we want to collaborate and now we're collaborating, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to build out the relationships, okay? So we had trust with a local government unit, and they said to us, we really want to understand better why this problem is perpetuated in our community. Why do we have so many properties that are abandoned, vacant, and tax delinquent? Right. And so we said, great. We'll think about this, get back to you, and let's have a conversation. We decided together that what we really needed to understand was, what do investors and residents see in those properties, or what don't they see in those properties? So if assessed values are coming in at somewhere around anywhere between $25 and $500 for city lots, okay, we have to understand not only what the assessor is seeing in that lot, but what individuals are seeing in that lot when they come into that community. So do they just see the property value, or do they see something more than that? And so what we did is we worked with local government officials, and including people like property tax assessors, and said to them, what are the characteristics that you think of when you look at this piece of property? Not just the economic characteristics, but the social characteristics that are there. So crime, poverty, how are you attaching a value to this property? And what is affecting your perception of that property? Why did we want that? Because even though the properties were valued at $50, $25, $500, nobody was purchasing the properties. So the market value, even though it was extremely low, was not capturing the entire story, right? So we went through and we evaluated a number of factors, and then we handed it back to them. And because, so that was step number one. It became politically unpopular to ask those types of questions, so it didn't really move forward. So we had to sit on the study, continue to build the relationship, and then about 3 or 4 years later, they came back to us, and another unit came to us and said, "Look, this is affecting the economic success of the region. So now we have to reevaluate again what we're looking at. And so they wanted to focus specifically on identifying the barriers other than the social barriers to moving this property into productive use. Because when you have property that's not in productive use, you have a lower cap space, which means you have limitations on your economic development, right? Okay. So we the question moved from, okay, so what are those factors that are contributing to the perceived property value, to a more basic question, which is where we didn't know where those properties are located. I know that sounds like unbelievable, right? But the properties that were being held up in tax sales, these are our sales on properties that individuals don't pay taxes on, okay, were all in paper document. They were all tax deeds, okay? They hadn't been computerized yet because the policy problem hadn't been prioritized, right? So we had to move from creating a a database that could be used for policy analysis to actually thinking about how we use that database to affect change in the community. Recognizing that we have all of these we have certain assets and we have certain vulnerabilities. And one of the vulnerabilities that we decided to focus on was that understanding of policy and data that had not taken place previously. Okay. So we wanted to create a coordination and see if we couldn't bridge the silos that existed between county government, municipal government, and the university. We did it by looking at measures of resilience, right? And so we obviously knew we couldn't tackle all 4 areas in one project. We knew we had struggles with governance because of the balkanization of the community. We also knew about poverty, lower levels of education. We weren't there to address that particular issue. We weren't looking specifically at growth rates, economic growth rates, and unemployment, but we did focus on the 4th pillar here, which is the environment, right? And so decided that we were going to take a deeper dive and look at the areas of the community that were built up and the areas of the community that were abandoned, and tried to better understand why that pattern had emerged in our community. So we needed the relevant data. This meant that we had to abandon and delinquent properties. To do that, we built out partnership. It had to be a partnership. It wasn't something the university could do by itself. It wasn't something the city could do by itself or the county could do by itself, right? So the center, which is CURE, okay, coordinated the county government, the IU Northwest students, and private sector actors to take a look at this particular data issue so that we could foster economic redevelopment. Okay, what we learned in the very beginning, these are some of the facts that we had up front. We didn't have the specific parcel data. We knew that 42% of the land, 42% of the land was blighted and needed demolition. So think about what that would mean in terms of financial cost to any one community that had already suffered these economic stresses, right? They had to address almost half of all of the property in that county. Much of it was what we call brownfields, potentially perceived to be contaminated lands and or had already been determined to be contaminated lands because of the industrial history. 20% of the parcels were tax exempt because of nonprofit status. So right away, you've lost a source of revenue and income because they're tax exempt properties. Some of the properties had already been transferred into city ownership because that was the only way to get them moved into a productive economic role. So the city had that burden as well. All right. And the rest of them had significant tax delinquency of the 56,000. So you've got 7,000 almost owned by the city, another 7,000 of the parcels, another 12% that were tax delinquent, not owned by the city, but also not being productive. And they didn't know where those parcels were geographically located. Okay. So they were stuck in a tax system that was not efficient. So we began to identify not only from the data, the types of the number of parcels, the types of parcels, but then as you'll see, we were able to move through conversations with our community partners to better understand what the legal barriers were to moving these parcels into productive use. Okay. So the goal was identify, then analyze, and then develop the solutions. We call them churner parcels because these parcels would go up on tax sales multiple times. Some of them had gone up 13 and 14 years. So the same parcel moving through the system. Remember, that's a cost to the county, right? Every time you have a tax sale, it's a cost to the county. So those parcels had to be addressed. And this is like my favorite picture of the slide. These are our champions. These are our students at IU Northwest, an incredibly ambitious, smart group of students who come from all different majors, but all came together because they were interested in economic development in their community. So in that group, we have public policy, we have social work, we have economics, we have general studies, we have radiology. So who would think that this group of students would come together to take on this task? So I'm so proud of them because we had 40,000 tax deeds on paper. Those tax deeds had to be put into a database. And they worked for a good year doing this work to make sure that we could get to the policy problem solutions that we needed to get to. So, yeah, that was our team. This is way too small for you to see, but I wanted you to get an idea of what they were working from. So they took a tax deed, which is a document that looks like this, okay, compared it to tax records, and then mapped out parcels onto maps. So we could get a visualization of where these parcels are and get a sense of what the community would be able to do if they were to turn those parcels into something that was productive. Okay. So the data analysis and the research was specifically on the the types and number of properties. We were looking for the demand and supply of these properties over a period of almost 10 years. So we could understand the flow in and out of the market for tax certificates. It's a way of holding property that's in tax sale, and then thinking about how we were going to build the community's capacity to do this kind of work. So we didn't just do it for the city of Gary, we did it for the entire county. So we were working with 16 different municipalities because those tax parcels actually didn't just affect urban core communities, they affected other communities as well. So it was important to educate everybody about the issues that we were having and then build their capacity to address it. So when it comes down to local government capacity, we're talking about things like, do people know how to look up the tax deeds? Can they get the information from county government? Can they actually map out the parcels in their community? And many times they don't have access to the GIS, the geographic information systems, or they don't have a person who knows how to use it in a way that's going to be beneficial for policy making. So we had to coordinate with 16 of those municipalities and the county government to build their capacity, take a look at this issue, and connect up that data to the regional data that need to make the policy decisions. Okay, so we wanted to go from problem to policy change. The model was evidence-based issue identification, informed what we call informed idea generating processes. So all along this process, we were working with local experts and we'd say to them, okay, this is the data we have. What do you see in the data? What do you see are potential solutions for this problem? Take it back, compare it to what our experts at the university were thinking about this issue, categorize different options for them, and eventually we came up with a planned set of legislative action. Okay, so here's a visual map that gets created when you have these unpaid parcel taxes. They go through a local government process. People don't bid on them, and then they start accumulating. So what you can see here in the red is parcels that have been um, ineffectively moving through the tax sale process. And if once that happens, because there's no ownership that's attached to them that can move them forward economically, you can begin to see how different parts of the city could easily suffer increased levels of economic decline. In other words, take this group of parcels right here, right? Or take a single parcel out here, right? Think government doesn't own it. It's held up in a process that is inefficient. It sits abandoned, vacant, and there's no productive activity. And it's scattered. So there's no opportunity to do planned economic development if you have parcels up here, parcels down here, parcels on the east, and parcels on the west. So the goal was to see if we could find concentrations of these parcels so that you could target specific areas of high density for this abandoned tax parcel, okay? And then see if there was a way to move those parcels into city ownership or private ownership so that they could be redeveloped. But first we had to know where they are. Okay. I wanted to give you a sense of where the city has owned parcels as well. So the red here are city-owned parcels. And you can tell that even with the transfer of ownership to the city, it can be incredibly difficult to think about economic development plans when you've got a very disaggregated map here of parcels. Sometimes there's concentrations in certain areas, but in other areas up and through here, they might be one house on one block, two houses on the next block, three houses in the next block, but it's not a picture that you would look at and say, "Oh, well, I think I know what I can do with this from an economic development perspective," right? So that's a significant barrier that they faced. So, in the interest of time here, I'm gonna move through this a little bit. It's okay? Okay. So remember I said that we wanted to look at what people perceived those parcels to be? We knew there was value there because we had speculators that were coming into the community. Okay. The way the system was set up, it was profitable for speculators to buy these tax sale certificates, hold them, and then let them go back to tax sale. So the speculators came in and they were bad actors, and essentially they were fueling the system of keeping these parcels in this process. All right. And in some cases, they were accumulating parcels and then I guess you would say holding them to their own economic advantage in a non productive way from a public sector perspective. So I'll give you an example. A casino was coming into the city of Gary. They needed parcels to build. There was one particular parcel that they really wanted to have in order to have a cohesive development plan for their casino. And an individual was holding that property essentially hostage and saying that they weren't going to give up the property. So they were holding up the entire economic development project. What ended up happening is the casino found a unique way to build around them. But the point being that that's not the most efficient way to do things. Like you're talking about the redevelopment of a city, right? Okay. So when we saw that pattern emerging, we knew that there had to be changes to be made inside of the legislative process to limit that type of opportunistic behavior. Now, I'm not saying that speculation is bad. Speculation is good. People need to invest in properties, right? But when it was occurring under the old legislation, it was actually negatively impacting economic development, not positively impacting economic development. So that was our first hint that a significant barrier was going to be a legislative barrier that actually existed. Okay, so the city was able to counteract some of this activity by acquiring the some of the parcels that I just showed you, but there was also a limit on the number of properties that the city could acquire. So they were limited to acquiring 100 parcels per year. This was county government's decision. Now, they have 7,000 parcels, so let's do the math. Okay. If you wanted to move those parcels into city government or another governmental unit at 100 parcels a year, that's a very long time, right? Not the planning framework for economic development. Okay. So we had identified now a second barrier that was happening at the county level for the transfer of the properties to local government, whether it's Gary or any other local government that wanted to have those parcels. Gary was particularly affected because they had so many parcels and the limit was 100 parcels. Okay. So this these parcels were not just residential parcels. They were also commercial parcels. And so, but most of them were residential. So this map is showing you the yellow, the residential parcels, the red is the commercial parcels. And then we took a deeper dive here to better understand not only the types of parcels that were there, but the types of local government change that would need to take place in terms of rezoning, right? In order to more effectively support the economic development plan. So it wasn't just about knowing there's 7,000 parcels. It wasn't about knowing that there's some commercial and some residential parcels. It wasn't about knowing just the status of those parcels, but it was like looking at each level, local government, county government, and state government, what those barriers would be to moving those properties into productive use. Okay. So, um, what happened? At a practical level, once the data analysis was done, okay, instead of transferring 100 parcels back to the city, there were 425 certificates that went back. So in the time period that we did the project, which was a little less than 2 years, we had more than quadruple the number of parcels the city could take ownership of. They had selected the parcels that would be most beneficial to them. So if you go back and think about those maps, they saw the mapping of them. They saw where they wanted to prioritize their economic development regions. They picked out those parcels. Those parcels were removed from a tax sale process, transferred to the city, and so they become immediately available for economic development opportunities that were not available to them prior. Okay. So the city collaborated with us. Then they also prepared another 1,000 parcels in a priority list so that that priority list could be used to identify future parcels and future tax sales that could be taken off so that that transfer could take place. Now, all of this is not without cost to the city, but we're comparing costs without the transfer to the city to costs with transfer to the city. When we, when a city goes through the process of transferring ownership of that parcel from the county to the city, there's a legal cost that is attached to that, right? So, and it's not inexpensive. So, if you were to use an external law firm, 23 parcels would cost you about $250,000 to get that done. All right. They did a lot of the work internally. And so that allowed them to address a larger number of parcels. That was part of the political concern about giving additional parcels to the city, is that those parcels would sit in their current status and not be transferred into productive use because the city didn't have the ability to transfer that legal title of the parcels, right? But through conversations facilitated in part by the university, we were able to facilitate that transfer with confidence that the city would be able to move those parcels forward and put them into productive use. Okay. So, what then happened is that, as I said, the properties that were already owned were examined, and the new tax parcel certificates that they wanted were identified. Those are all the yellow parcels. And so you can see, if we just look at this one side of the street here, that prior to that, they had piecemeal properties. Once they acquired the tax sale certificates, they had almost the entire block of properties, changing the framework for economic development, right? Okay. So at the legal level, what happened was we worked with state legislators to, and this is really more the where our reliance on the county became absolutely essential. The university is not an advocate for legal change, right? The university provided the data. The university did the analysis with the community partners. The attorneys for the county advocated for the legal change that was informed by evidence and data. They had tried many times before to change the law to address the issues that were limiting the transfer of the properties. They were not successful. And they were not successful, they say, not in our words, because they did not have the data. They did not have the evidence. So when they had the evidence before them, not only was the bill uh, bipartisan in construction, it was also passed unanimously in the state legislature, in the House, and in the Senate. Almost unheard of, I think, in most instances, but in particular when you have a supermajority in the state of Indiana for one party. So unanimous bill all around, changed the law, which then limited the ability of the speculators to continue to do what they were doing, which is holding those properties essentially hostage. Okay, we engaged legislative representatives. We built out the relationship with those legislators and created legislative change. And I say a lot of that work was the students. They presented the data to the legislators. They had the conversations with the legislators. They convinced the county government that this was the way to move forward. And we had, as a result of that, new law in the state of Indiana. Um, so I just wanted to summarize for you and say that, the work helped us cement our ability to be what we call a place-based university focused on connecting research, teaching, and service. And um, at the same time was mutually beneficial and reciprocal. And so that um, helped us to encourage not only other community actors to partner with us, but also motivated faculty on campus to seek out these types of projects, which could better inform their research and have impact in the community. So it changes the dynamic that we have in our particular context for the university's role. And